Hey, I'm the Hard Times guy. Today I want to talk to you about a place called the Pierce Farm. I live on South Leatherwood Road, about 4 miles from Bedford, Indiana, downtown square. And when I'm going back and forth to town, I pass a place about a mile down the road that I refer to as the Pierce Farm. Betty and I bought our place in 1976, I think. And when we bought that place, a man and his wife lived there. The man's name was Lovell Pierce. And they had a farm there on the north side of South Leatherwood Road, and I'm going to guess about 150 acres. I think it's actually a little less than that. I think it started out being a 160 acre quarter section, and they sold a little bit off and now it's a little less than 150 acres. Always liked the place. Shortly after we moved here, I was going to town or coming home, one of those two things, and I noticed in the front yard a man who I recognized, Lovell Pierce. I knew him from work. He worked at General Motors, so did I. And I knew him from there, and he was just a really pleasant kind of a guy, easy to talk to, nice guy, always a gentleman. And so when I saw him there, I thought, I bet that's where he lives. I bet he owns that place. And so right then I didn't stop, but within a day or two I stopped there. Next time I saw him out in the yard, I stopped and pulled in and talked to him. Told him, introduced myself to him. He said, "Oh yeah," he said, "I know you from over in Pistons." I said, "Yeah, I'm there." He said, "Well, I'm glad you stopped." And I told him just bought this place down the road, and we became friends over time, and I did some bird hunting on his place, and I don't think I ever fished in any of his ponds, but I trekked around on the place quite a bit when I was younger. Of course, he and his wife passed. I think her name was Mary. They passed, and there was no one on the farm for a long time. But as I passed the place, in the summertime, I'd noticed that they'd stacked some concrete blocks up out there and put up a mailbox. And somebody was staying there part of the time in the summertime. I figured it's part of his family, one of his children, or maybe more than one. I didn't know. But I noticed for a good number of years that in the summertime someone came there and stayed for a while. Then they'd be gone again towards the end of summer. And occasionally I'd see someone around there, a lady or different ladies, and then later on I began to see a lady and a young girl with her, teenager. Maybe wasn't even a teenager when I first noticed her. So one day I saw the lady out there on the porch, looked up in the rearview mirror, wasn't nobody behind me, so I just pulled over there in front of the house, rolled down my window, leaned out the window, and introduced myself to the lady. I didn't want to get out and just walk up on her porch because, sometimes that frightens women. But I did want to just say something friendly to her and introduce myself to her, tell her I lived down the road. Well, she got up off her swing and she walked out about halfway to the road there in the sidewalk. She began talking to me, and it wasn't too long. We just were having a conversation about all manner of things, and she said, "Why don't you get out and come sit on the porch?" So I did. I got out and went up there and sat in a lawn chair that she had there on the porch too, and talked to her a little while longer. And that was the start of what became a friendship. And I learned that her name was Melanie. And I learned that she lived in Mississippi. But this was her family's farm, and Lovell was her father. And again, I'm not sure, but I think her mother's name was Mary. That was how I first acquainted myself with Melanie. And then, not too long after that, I don't know whether it was the next year, or I think it was probably the next year, but it might have even been that same year, I'm not sure. I had known Melanie for too long, and I stopped there one day, and I could tell there was something else going on. Someone else was there, and it was her sister. Her sister Ramona. I met Ramona that day. And those girls were down there in the garage, and what they were doing was they was getting ready to have a yard sale. So, of course, I wanted to, you know how I am, I want to know when the yard sale was. Didn't want to miss that. Somebody dragging stuff out of a place like that had been there that long, had all them outbuildings. I wanted to be there. So I started talking to them about the yard sale, and they started asking me for advice about things. And so where I could, I tried to help them out on the price of things and how yard sales worked. And I volunteered to get an ad placed for them in a place where it would do them the most good and something that they wouldn't have known about. And I helped them with their pricing scheme, and I even, before the sale started, said, you know, this and that or this thing, I might be interested in that, and I think you should be able to get I tell them what price it might bring. And then I told them, if you want to sell it right now, I'll pay a price for it. I gave them a price, and they decided they wanted to see what happened in the yard sale first, but that's okay. I mean, that's what I said. But I ended up buying several things from them in the yard sale and after the yard sale. But I learned more about them too there that day. I'd spent, I don't know, the one day of the yard sale, I spent probably half the day down there sitting in the shade talking to Melanie and talking to customers that come in and out of there, because I'd lived on that road for a long time by now, and I knew a lot of the people around in the neighborhood, and I knew a lot of people stopped at the yard sale that weren't even from there. And so I spent the better part of an afternoon there one time, and Melanie began to tell me some things. And you've already seen this, but I'm going to show you this. This is, I'm going to call it a fruit press. It's got a screw in the handle. It's got a piece of wood that fits in the top of this thing, and you screw that handle around, that wood goes down into this box container, and it mashes the fruit until it becomes pulp or juice. And this one, I'm not sure what exactly I think that opens, but I'm not going to tear it up trying to open it. I'm not sure what exactly they used it for, but I'm going to guess, because I know there was an orchard on the place, I'm going to guess it was a smaller version of something made to create applesauce or crush apples. And I liked it, found it. I didn't see it before the yard sale, but during the yard sale I found it sitting over there among some other things, and I made an offer on it, and eventually I bought it. When I first bought it, you can see, I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's the thing's made of oak. It's almost all oak, every board, and it's got some interesting grain in it. It's got some tiger oak on this board here, there, and it's nice. It didn't say Pierce Farm on it. I put that on there. But when I bought this thing, it was gray. In fact, it was battleship gray. I thought it was painted gray. Had so much dust on it. It had been sitting there for so long wherever they found it that it was gray. And I bought it thinking it was painted gray. And when I turned the hose on it, I was pleasantly surprised to find out it was oak. And I cleaned it up, painted that sign on it, and liked it so well I've just kind of kept it. I've had a price on it before and had it in my antique booth for a while, but I had one of those, I don't really want to sell at prices on it, because I don't really want to sell it. And now that Melanie's gone, I'm probably not going to sell it. It'd be hard to buy that from me. That same, I mentioned already that The girls told me there used to be an orchard on the place. They had an apple orchard there. And in one of the outbuildings, they had a big old apple cider kind of a press, one where you put the apples in a big hopper and they feed down in there, and you turn a big crank handle and they go through there and become barrel-shaped thing that the press goes down in and squeezes all the juice out, and it goes down on the platform underneath it and runs out. I bought that from them. My intention with that was to freshen it up, maybe replace one of the legs on it that had been replaced before, and I wanted to replace it with something that looked more original to it. Maybe put a little paint on it to give it a little color. I don't want a total restoration of it like that one you can see down at Apple Acres. I don't want to do that to it, but because I like the fact that it looks old and used and worn, but I'd like to give it a little color. I hope to get around to that. Actually, I've got two of those. Hope to get around to that someday. Have that there. But who knows? Somebody might come along like it better than I do and buy it from me before I get that done. And then another thing that I learned about that day and got, and I love this. This is a story that I love, and you've seen me tell stories like this as the Hard Times guy. I've got some stories like this about me and my grandfather. But this story is about an 11-year-old girl and her dad. And this was Melanie in Lovell. When she was a little girl, she said, Daddy used to let me play in his shop. And I could get in his shop and get boards and whatever, and I could make things if I wanted to. Dad encouraged me to do that. And she said, I made this furniture. It was sitting there on the ground. We were sitting there in a couple of them old metal lawn chairs. She told me that story, and I said, well, after she told me the story, I started looking at the things, and they were really primitive and really crude. One of them was a shelf, looked like a small cup, and the other one was a bench. Just looked like a bench, and it had been made from, I wouldn't even call it the scrap box in her dad's shop. It probably was the kindling box. This stuff was beyond scrap. It was on its way to becoming a kindling for the wood stove, I think. She rescued it, 11 years old, built this furniture out of it, played with it for a good while when she was a child, she told me. And she's always kept it. Man, I love that story. And I said, well, I was kind of interested in that stuff before, just because I like primitive looking stuff, but I wasn't willing to pay much for it. But I said, now that you told me that story, I like that a lot better now. I want to buy it. And so I said, put a price on it, and if it's not too unreasonable, I'll just buy that, because I want to preserve that story that you just told me about it. And I love the fact that you did that when you were a girl. It's just the kind of thing I like. She said, well, why don't you just take those? Why don't you just, they've been here almost 2 days. Nobody's offered to buy them. She said, I didn't want very much for them anyway. She said, well, you just take them. I said, I don't want to do that. But she insisted that I take them, so I did. And now they're, since that time, her and I, Betty, become friends, and it'd be hard to separate me from those two, I'm afraid. Not because of what they are, but because of the story and the relationship that we developed with Melanie. And she told me other stories while we was there. I think she said it was 1952 when she, I don't know how she remembered that, but it's 1952 when she built those things in her dad's shop. And they had a big old iron kettle in there in the garage, and she told me they used to kill a hog there in the wintertime, and she told me all about the process of killing the hog and how they used that big old iron kettle. And those of you that ever killed a hog, you know what I'm talking about. I've never killed a hog, but I've heard the process described. And she told me all about that, and a lot of stories that we sit and talk. And over the years, since I first met Melanie, I've sat and talked to her a lot about all manner of things, and she's just one of these people you can talk to about anything. She talked to me about a lot of things that I didn't even want to know about, some of the things that going on in her family with her children or grandchildren, but still, just that right there just illustrates to you how open and heartfelt she was about things, that she got to a point where she could share intimate things and talk to you and ask you what you thought about this or that, and you could talk to her that way too if you wanted to. So she's just a wonderful person. One day I'd stopped to see Melanie about something. I think I'd stopped that day because I saw a pickup truck in her yard that I knew belonged to a guy. It was I think it's about a 37 Ford pickup truck. And I just love that old truck. I saw it sitting in her yard, and I knew the guy that owned it, and I thought, I'm going to stop there and see what in the heck that guy's got to do with Melanie. And I went in there, and he was somebody that she knew from church. And I spoke to him. I said, hi, Dave, and we had a little conversation. He was working on a ceiling fan for her. That's why he stopped. But while I was there, I stood there and was talking to Melanie, and we were standing there kind of in the dining room. She was standing in a doorway with her head up, or her arm up on the door frame, and I noticed there behind her a cupboard. And I'd seen that cupboard before. Actually, it looked like a glass door cupboard, but I recognized it all of a sudden, and it struck me because I realized that I was looking at a Bedford pie safe. Now, it had been messed with. Melanie's mother at some time had antiqued it, a combination of paint and polyurethane that just really messes stuff up. But back in the 50s and 60s, it was a popular thing to do to old stuff, and much old stuff like that got messed up by some well-intentioned person trying to make something better, and actually made it worse. And that's what happened to this Bedford pie safe. And at the same time she had done that, she'd thrown away the original pulls and put some other pulls on it that weren't right for it. And they'd taken the tins out of the doors and replaced it with glass. And I think that's what caused me to overlook it for the few times that I'd seen it before. But when I realized what it was, I thought, wow, that's a Bedford pie safe. And if you don't know what a Bedford pie safe is, go back in my videos and find, there's a couple of videos back there, can't tell what the name of them is, where I talk about Bedford pie safes, what they are, what the significance of them is. I'm not going to repeat all that in this video, but there was a Bedford pie safe there, and I said, Melanie, is that pie safe for sale? And she said, well, it might be, but I don't know. I said, well, why is that? She said, well, it belongs to Ramona. It's Ramona's. And I said, well, how come she didn't take it home with her? She had a story about that too, and I'm not going to get into it, but she said, I don't know whether Ramona would sell that or not. I doubt if she would. And I said, well, if she would, I made her an offer for it. And she said, well, I'll let her know. And it turns out that Ramona didn't want to sell it, and I don't know whether she would have sold it. I doubt if she would have sold it for any amount of money, but she didn't want to sell it for what I offered. And so she's happy with that, and I am too, because I offered too much for it. It's not worth what a Bedford pie safe once was, because there ain't enough old people like me to even know what a Bedford pie safe is. But that one, it would have just took too much to get it back right, and I would have had to do a lot of work on it and still not been able to recoup my investment. So. But there's a Bedford pie safe. There was a Bedford pie safe in that house, and I was tickled to death to get to see another one. That's 5 now I've seen in my lifetime. And I have one. Of course, if you watch the Bedford pie safe videos, you'll know that it's one we called Aunt Colleen's pie safe that began, now we call Aunt Betty's pie safe, or Grandma Betty's pie safe. And another thing, and I noticed this during the yard sale and since then in conversations that I've had with the sisters, both when they were both there together, and conversations that I've had with Ramona when after Melanie was gone, and conversations that I had with Melanie about Ramona, but when Ramona was not there. Ramona come down in the summertime a lot of times, I think, but she'd maybe stay a week or maybe a little longer than that with Melanie. But Melanie came and spent most of the summer just about every year. And those two women were, they loved one another. They had a great mutual respect for one another. And it was just a delight and a blessing and an honor to have met them and known them. And I so admire both of them. I don't know whether I already said this or not, but if I did, I'm just going to say it again. I know I've already said that I noticed about Melanie coming and spending the winter or the summer, and the mailbox going up and then the mailbox coming down. And I noticed that for several years before I ever stopped. And when I finally did stop, I want to say this about that. I should have stopped way before I did. One of the regrets I have is that I didn't stop. The very first time I saw that mailbox up and realized someone was there, I wished I'd have stopped, because that was several years ago that happened, and I just cost myself all that time from when I first noticed that was happening to when I did finally one day stop. I cost myself all that time of having a wonderful friendship with Melanie, and that's one of my regrets about that situation, because she's a wonderful person. She became a genuine friend. I'm going to miss her. I already miss her. When I drive by there, I just have a kind of a empty feeling about, she went off to Mississippi. I didn't even get to really say goodbye to her, and now she's gone. Here's an illustration of how she was. This past 4th of July, on the 4th of July, my family has a get-together. We have it here in this building and in the grounds around this. And all the kids come and the grandkids and my brother and sisters, whoever's around. Betty's sisters and brothers have been here before. My brother's children, they generally come. And I've just had... We have a wonderful gathering. Sometimes I think one time we had 58 people here on 4th of July, and everybody brings something. We have a pitch-in dinner. Betty, she cooks and prepares for a couple of days before it ever happens, and there's enough stuff here to feed half of Lawrence County, and I have to eat leftovers for 2 weeks. But we do that on the 4th of July. And we have friends, too, that come sometimes. And I always like to have somebody who can play a guitar come. My brother, he used to play. Heather, my middle daughter, her father-in-law, he's a guitar player. And we've had other people that come, and I invite them just because I want them to come bring a guitar and play and sit around and play the guitar, and I can sit around and cry and listen to them. And so... not just guitar pickers, but lots of different people have been invited as friends, and they come. Well, Melanie, this last year, I was talking to her one day, and I said, Melanie, 4th of July is coming up. I said, if you're not doing anything, you ought to come down. You get a free meal. I said, just come down to the house, and I told her what was going on and what happened. And she had met one of my son-in-laws, John, And I don't know whether she didn't met any of the rest of my family or not, except for Betty. But she didn't hardly know anybody but me and Betty. And a lot of people just would be real uncomfortable with that, and they'd be polite and cordial and say, well, they might show up, but they wouldn't. Well, she was polite and cordial and said she might show up and wanted to know if she could bring anything. And I told her, nah, she didn't have to bring anything, but if she wanted to bring something, green beans would be a hit, I'm sure, because a lot of us like green beans, and Betty usually made enough green beans that we always had plenty, but you know, you can't ever have too many green beans. And I didn't mind eating good green beans as a leftover, and I knew she had fresh green beans in that garden out there, and I knew her green beans would be good. Well, guess what? She showed up with green beans, and they were good. She had lots of bacon in them. And she just made herself at home here with my family. It was just like she was part of the family. She just went, I took some pictures that day, and she shows up in a lot of the pictures just around here with first one person then another, just Melanie being Melanie. And everybody just felt real comfortable with her, and sat and talked to her and shared. And I'm glad I got that. I'm glad that happened. Glad that she decided to come. Another fond memory I'll have of her, and I got some pictures to commemorate it with. What can we get from this? Well, apart from getting to reminisce about Melanie and what a wonderful person she was, and I'm going to go off on a tangent again here for a minute. I was about ready to say this at the end of it, but she was involved in all kinds of things that I can't even begin to tell you about, and I can't. If I was writing a resume for her, and I couldn't begin to cover the things that, like maybe Ramona or one of her grandkids or some other people might tell you about her. She was involved in all kinds of activities for the youth. She was involved in things in her church. She was involved in things in her community. She was involved in things at the schools that she was a teacher in. The woman just had herself right in the middle of good works all the time. And some of those things were pointed out maybe in her obituary. I went to her. She was a quilter. That was another thing that she did. In fact, I had several conversations with her about quilting. She talked about quilting with me one time, and my mother was a quilter, and my mother was she was absolutely phenomenal quilter. I mean, she's my mother, and I'm prejudiced and all that, but if you saw some of the quilts that my mother made, man, she can make a quilt. And in fact, if you want to look at some of them, go find a video I made about quilting, because it's got a lot of pictures of my mother's quilts in it. But I had that conversation with Melanie, and she got the impression that I knew something about quilts, so she liked to talk to me about quilting and about the details of it and get my opinion on things. And I had to tell her I didn't know squat about quilting, really. I used to buy old quilts, and I knew what a good old quilt was, but I didn't have anything that I could offer about what you should do or what you shouldn't do, or how this is done or how that's done. But she every once in a while, she'd bring up quilting and ask me something. I digress. What I started to say and close with is, I'm going to repeat that I cost myself a lot of time and a lot of opportunity to have been Melanie's friend by not stopping to say hello to her, not making just a neighborly gesture long before I did. And I'm telling you, this is much like the video about being a blessing to somebody. I made a video, one of the Sunday morning videos, and something about be a blessing. This is an example of that. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. When you got the opportunity to just reach out and say hello, welcome to the community, I live down the road, or I go to this church and I see you here, and any kind of an opportunity that you have like that, and you have those all the time. I meet people all the time that I strike up a conversation with at yard sales and auctions and stuff, people I never saw before, may never see again. But you have an opportunity to just offer yourself, just to be congenial and kind and compassionate sometimes. Don't let those go. Seize those when they're in front of you. You may be robbing yourself of a blessing, or you may be robbing a blessing from someone else. So, I don't know what kind of a video this is going to turn out to be, but it is what it is. I'm a hard times guy. You have a good day.